A mind that never stopped asking, and a heart that never stopped believing. This film about the life of Stephen Hawking, based on the memoir of his wife, Jane Hawking, called Traveling to Infinity: My Life with Stephen. At the University of Cambridge, where the atmosphere is charged with intellect and youth, two students ride bicycles through the historic campus, carefree and full of energy. One of them is Stephen Hawking, a quiet genius with a curious mind. Inside a nearby hall, a formal university party is underway. Among the crowd stands a girl named Jane Wilde. Alone but poised, quietly observing the scene. When Stephen and his friend arrive, he notices Jane almost immediately. Something about her presence draws him in. He approaches her and they begin to talk. Stephen shares that he studies cosmology, while Jane reveals her passion for literature. But she finds Stephen's words fascinating and is drawn to his passion. Curious, Jane asks Stephen to explain what cosmology actually means. Stephen tells her that cosmology is a subject for atheists, a scientist that tries to understand the universe through one ultimate equation, a universal equation that explains everything in existence. As Jane prepares to leave, she tells Stephen that she enjoyed their conversation and expresses her belief that he will one day discover that very equation.
I hope you find your equation.
Despite their very different fields, a connection begins to form. Their conversation flows naturally, and in this quiet moment, the first spark of their relationship blooms. The next day, Stephen's professor assigns a complex problem for all the students to solve. Back at the hostel, Stephen is still asleep when his friend comes in and asks if he's looked at the equation yet. But Stephen hasn't even decided what topic to choose for his PhD thesis, and the uncertainty is beginning to weigh on him. As soon as his friend leaves, Stephen jumps out of bed and rushes to his study table. He tries working through some of the equations, but in the middle of his effort, he accidentally spills coffee on one of the papers. Frustrated and flustered, he continues to push through until it's time for class. By the time Stephen arrives, he's late. The professor begins asking students about the problem he had assigned. When it's Stephen's turn, he reaches into his pocket and hands the professor a set of small, handwritten notes. He explains that he was only able to solve 9 of the questions. The professor looks over the papers and is quietly impressed by Stephen's brilliance.
Oh, thank God. Bravo.
Later, the professor invites Stephen into an old university lab, the same one where J.J. Thomson discovered the electron and Rutherford split the atom. He tells Stephen that he's selecting a few students to attend an upcoming seminar based on merit. If Stephen is interested, he's welcome to join. Meanwhile, his connection with Jane begins to deepen. Jane is deeply religious and often visits the church. One day, Stephen waits for her outside after the service and invites her over to his house for lunch, to which Jane agrees. Over time, they begin to share more than just meals. They share ideas. Stephen talks about the life and death of stars, while Jane speaks of heaven, earth, and faith. Despite their different beliefs, their bond only grows stronger, and soon they fall in love. Back in class, Stephen attends a lecture where the professor begins to explain the concept of black holes.
Creating a black hole.
That's the moment when something clicks in his mind. Later, while drinking coffee, he starts thinking intensely about the formation of black holes and realizes that this might be the subject he's been searching for. He decides his thesis will focus on black holes and the nature of time. He begins working tirelessly. One day, while scribbling equations on a blackboard, his hand suddenly begins to tremble. Alarmed and confused, he tries to steady himself. As he walks down a staircase, his legs give out. His body begins to betray him. In a sudden collapse, he falls hard to the ground. When he opens his eyes, he's no longer at the university, but he's in a hospital bed. After running a series of tests, the doctor delivers heartbreaking news to Stephen that he has a motor neuron disease,
neurological disorder,
a degenerative condition that will slowly strip his body of all movement. Eventually, he won't be able to speak or even breathe on his own. When Stephen asks about his brain, the doctor tells him that it will remain unaffected, fully active even as his body shuts down. He's given just 2 years to live. After discovering about his diagnosis, Stephen's world shatters. He retreats completely, isolating himself in his room, shutting out everyone including Jane. His once curious, ambitious life turns into silence. He ignores Jane's calls and avoids speaking to her altogether. But Jane doesn't give up. She visits Stephen at his home and tells him something that changes everything. Jane told him that she loves him deeply and wants to spend the rest of her life with him, no matter what the future holds. Despite Stephen's father's hesitation, Jane convinces him, and soon after, Jane and Stephen got married. Their life together begins with both joy and hardship. Jane lovingly takes care of Stephen, and not long after their wedding, they welcome a baby boy. Despite his deteriorating health, Stephen begins working again on a thesis that proposes the Big Crunch theory. In this theory, Stephen suggests that just as the universe was formed by a massive explosion called the Big Bang, it's been expanding ever since. But one day the expansion will stop. The universe will begin to contract, eventually collapsing back in on itself in a big crunch. His professors are deeply impressed by the boldness and brilliance of this idea.
Well done, Doctor.
Stephen wants to prove this theory, but his physical condition continues to worsen. He can no longer feed himself or walk. His world is shrinking even as his mind explores the vastness of space and time. One day, while struggling to dress, Stephen's neck gets caught awkwardly in a sweater. As he watches the smoke rise from a nearby fire, something extraordinary happens, and he has a sudden realization. In that moment of panic, a new idea about black holes sparks in his mind. Jane now brings Stephen to the university in a wheelchair. Despite his condition, Stephen delivers a lecture in front of several professors. In that lecture, he proposes a groundbreaking idea: Hawking radiation. He explains that black holes, contrary to popular belief, are not entirely black. Hawking radiation describes hypothetical particles that emerge out of the boundary of a black hole, known as the event horizon. According to this theory, black holes actually emit energy. Stephen tells the audience that the smaller a black hole is, the hotter it glows. Eventually, these black holes can shrink, and the tiniest of them might explode in a burst of heat, while larger ones would slowly evaporate over trillions of years, releasing a faint, cold breeze of energy into the universe.
Nonsense.
Many professors in the room dismiss the theory as absurd and begin walking out. But then, one respected professor stands up and says that while he came expecting to hear something ridiculous, what Stephen Hawking has presented is truly remarkable. This marks the beginning of Stephen's rise in the world of theoretical physics. His theory is soon published and becomes widely known as Hawking radiation, earning him immense respect in the scientific community. But while Stephen's fame rises, Jane begins to struggle. She's entirely consumed with taking care of Stephen and their children. Her own dreams, including finishing her thesis, are quietly pushed aside. The weight of caregiving begins to take a toll on her. Once full of energy and hope, now finds herself feeling overwhelmed and emotionally drained. Being emotionally exhausted, Jane confides in her mother about her growing frustrations. Her mother gently encourages her to start going to church again, a place that once gave her comfort. Jane begins attending services once more, and there she meets Jonathan, a kind and soft-spoken man who had lost his wife. With time, Jonathan and Jane strike up a warm friendship. Jonathan, who teaches piano, is soon invited to Jane's home to give lessons to her eldest son. Slowly, he becomes a regular presence in their lives, helping with the children, caring for Stephen, and easing Jane's daily burdens. He quietly becomes part of the family. Stephen, fully aware of his declining health, tells Jane that if she ever wants companionship or love from someone else, he wouldn't stand in her way. He understands the limitations of his body, and with quiet dignity gives her complete freedom. Their bond, though no longer physical, remains deeply respectful. Sometime later, Jane gives birth to a third child. During a family gathering, however, whispers begin to circulate and questions are raised about the child's paternity. Jane's mother even asks her directly if the child is truly Stephen's. Jane firmly responds that the child is Stephen's, and Jonathan, who overhears this painful exchange, quietly steps away. In the midst of all the chaos, Stephen's father begins to notice how much pressure Jane is under. He's always stood by Stephen through every choice, every challenge, but now he realizes that Jane is carrying a burden too heavy to bear alone. He gently points out that while Stephen has had support every step of the way, Jane has quietly sacrificed everything without complaint, and now she needs help.
You need proper living, nurse.
Later, Jonathan confesses to Jane that he has genuine feelings for her, but he doesn't want to be the cause of scandal or speculation. "People already think too much," he says softly. "I need to go." And with that, Jonathan leaves. A few days later, Stephen receives an invitation to attend an opera performance. He insists Jane stay behind, saying the students will accompany him, and she need not to worry. Before leaving for the opera event, Stephen suggests that Jane take the children on a camping trip. He believes the change of scenery might do them all good. But Jane hesitates. She doesn't think she'll be able to manage everything on her own. That's when Stephen brings up Jonathan, suggesting that she ask him to accompany them. Jane quietly responds that Jonathan won't come as he's already distanced himself. Later, just before heading to the opera, Stephen makes an unexpected decision. He visits Jonathan. With humility and quiet sincerity, Stephen tells him that Jane and the children need him. It's not about pride or obligation anymore. Stephen sees that Jane has always put everything before herself, and now she deserves someone who can help her carry the weight. It's a gesture of goodwill that speaks volumes, not only about Stephen's acceptance of reality, but also about his deep respect and love for Jane. Later during the opera, Stephen begins coughing violently. Blood spills from his mouth, and he's rushed to the hospital. There, doctors tell Jane that to save his life, they'll need to perform a tracheotomy, a surgical procedure that will make it impossible for him to speak again. Jane, devastated but resolute, agrees to the operation. She's willing to do anything to keep Stephen alive. After the surgery, Stephen lost the ability to speak. Communicating had become incredibly difficult. But he still had a mind full of ideas and things to say. To help him express himself, Jane hired a nurse who developed a system where Stephen could communicate by blinking his eyes to select the letters of the alphabet. Though slow and exhausting, it gave him a voice again, one blink at a time. Soon after, a voice synthesizer machine was introduced into Stephen's life.
Welcome to the future.
It came with a remote that allowed him to select words and sentences, which the machine would then speak aloud in a robotic voice.
My name is Stephen Hawking.
This technology became a life-changing tool for Stephen. It gave him the power to express his thoughts more freely and to continue his scientific work. With renewed purpose, Stephen began working on a book that would explain complex cosmological ideas to everyday readers. He named it A Brief History of Time. The book marked a turning point in his public life. It was a way to share his brilliant mind with the world, despite the physical limitations he now lived with. Eventually, Stephen was invited to America to receive an award for his contributions to science. But when it came time to decide who would accompany him, he surprised Jane by expressing his wish to take his assistant, Elaine, instead. That moment made things clear for Jane. She realized that the bond they once shared had changed. The love that held them together had gradually faded, not out of anger or betrayal, but through the slow, natural shifts brought by time, illness, and personal growth. There was no one to blame. They were both heartbroken, but they understood one another. Recognizing everything Jane had sacrificed for him, Stephen believed she deserved her own happiness now. He gave her a divorce, not out of resentment, but out of respect and love for all that she'd done, and for the life she still deserved to live. After their separation, Jane moved forward in life and found companionship with Jonathan, who had always been a quiet source of support and understanding. Meanwhile, Stephen traveled to America with Elaine. Upon their arrival, they were greeted with great respect and admiration. Stephen was honored with a warm welcome, and a grand seminar was held in recognition of his achievements. Despite the immense physical challenges and pain he had endured, Stephen still held on to a sharp mind and a sense of humor that never wavered. During the seminar, he thoughtfully answered each question from the students, his presence both humbling and inspiring. His words were full of wisdom, drawn from a life that had been anything but easy. As the event reached its end, Stephen chose to share the most important lesson life had taught him. He reminded everyone to keep looking up at the stars, to stay curious and never give up, no matter how hard life may seem.
While there is life, there is hope.
His final message resonated deeply with the audience, and the hall erupted in applause, echoing with admiration for a man who had defied every limitation. Upon returning to England, Stephen received an invitation from Queen Elizabeth II to the royal palace. He was to be honored for his extraordinary contributions to science. For this occasion, Stephen brought Jane and their 3 children with him. Though Stephen and Jane were no longer husband and wife, the bond they shared could never be erased. Jane had stood by him in his most difficult years, and Stephen always held a deep respect for her. In time, Jane married Jonathan and completed her PhD, fulfilling her long-delayed academic aspirations. Stephen found love with Elaine and later married her as well. Though their lives had taken different paths, Stephen and Jane remained close, connected by history, respect, and shared experiences. And with that, the story came to a quiet but powerful close, one of resilience, love, loss, and the enduring will to never stop reaching for the stars. Stephen Hawking's contribution wasn't limited to science. His entire life was an inspiration. He showed the world that no matter how tough life gets, if you're determined to do something, there's always hope. Through his research and groundbreaking theories, he tried to explain the mysteries of the universe, but his greatest achievement was the way that he lived his own life, with courage, humor, and an unbreakable spirit. This powerful journey was portrayed beautifully by Eddie Redmayne, who played the role of Stephen Hawking. Eddie didn't just capture Hawking's physical struggles, but also his emotional depth, brilliant mind, and sharp sense of humor. His performance was so powerful and authentic that he won the Academy Award for Best Actor, which wasn't just a recognition of his talent, but also a tribute to the extraordinary life of Stephen Hawking. Stephen's story teaches us all one unforgettable lesson. While there's life, there's hope.